Today I'm glad to have here with me an old friend of mine. We were students, graduate students at Rutgers University. And then for one reason or another, we each followed our own path. And now, because he has written a latest novel, I invited him and I'm so glad that he accepted. He is Angelo Spina, professor of Italian language and literature at Rutgers University, Newark.
Newark, yes.
So before much ado, I think we would like to start immediately and ask questions.
Okay. Very good.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm glad to be here.
Many, many years we don't see each other, right?
You're right.
Yeah.
You're right.
You know, I went on Google, I have to admit, and I checked on your name to see what came out. And your students consider you highly. They said, some say cool, he's cool. Some others said he's a very passionate professor. But I must tell them, in effect, I was thinking that even while we were at the graduate student, you already had made a name for yourself because you had already published a book of poetry at that time.
Yes, I did. Yeah.
Nobody else did, so you were very much appreciated or admired. And also you became the editor of La Fusta, which is a literary journal at the Rutgers University.
Rutgers, New Brunswick.
New Brunswick, right. That's right, that's where we...
And I should say, if you allow me to, I should say that if that magazine actually came into being, it was thanks to you, because without you, it would not have happened.
Well, ideally, it was begun by graduate students.
No, but it was you. You were the one who started it. You were the one who was basically, you dedicated yourself to making sure that it came into being.
But I'm surprised that even today it's being published, even over 45 years ago.
Yeah, I think it stopped for a certain period of time and then it started all over again. So yes,
so I'm glad I read your book and I found it very interesting and creative, especially with the language.
Thank you.
But I wanted to ask you, why did you choose Italian and not English? Because after so many years of living here in the U.S., you know, many people like us start writing in English and they have an audience rather than Italian. Now it's...
Well, you're not the first one who asks me that question because, as you might know, I have a BA in English, so my undergraduate work was in English before I went into graduate student in Italian. In fact, I've written many different things, short stories in English. This one, it began in Urbino, in fact. It began in Urbino, and it started as Italian, and I just went with it. I just decided that I would do it in Italian.
You mentioned Urbino. You take students?
No, remember when we were graduate students, every year the professors chose one particular student as a teaching assistant. And one year they chose me, and we were going to Florence, from Urbino to Florence. This woman sat next to me. She was an older student who came here to study Renaissance art. She sat next to me and she said, she was looking at me, she said, you know, your profile reminds me of an Etruscan statue. So I didn't know how to respond, but basically after that I began to look into the Etruscans, and I found out that near Ferrara, on the Adriatic coast, there's a city, an old Greek Etruscan city named Spina. And from
Spina is a big name, especially in the north.
But
anyway, you wrote this book, the novel, which was published very recently, maybe last year. And you called it Il Cucchiaio Trafugato. Which in English would be the stolen
but
spoon.
There's another word the reason why I use Trafugato. There's a short story by Edgar Allan Poe, The Purloined Letter. Purloined is another word of saying stolen, but it's got a more of a different connotation. So, so based on that, I used the Trafugato instead of Sembe.
So mentioning Allan Poe, you already mentioned that the title is already inspired through literary works.
Right.
But in this book, I read, or I discovered, or I felt that there were many other writers involved.
Yes. Yes.
Even Dante, Kafka. Am I right?
Leopardi, Montale, Rimbaud.
Yeah.
Different. Sometimes it's very obvious. Sometimes it's very indirect. But it's that's definitely there.
Yeah, I recognize the Kafka because of the.
Right.
At one point, you say the wall full of ants.
Right. I mentioned that a few times.
But what is the plot here? Briefly.
Okay, briefly, it's got two parts. Basically, the book has two parts. The first part has to do with the United States, with the character Hester, which is the main character, and her grandmother. And the second part, of course, takes place in Italy, which has the grandfather, Adriano, one of the characters, and Angelica, his sister. And basically, it all starts with the Cucchiaio Trafugato, which is the stolen spoon. And Adriano, which is the main character, comes to the United States, meets Esther, and from there, everything begins to basically develop. She begins to narrate her story, the grandmother's story, etc. So basically, if you want to talk about plots, it's not a linear book. It's not basically doesn't start from a point A, it goes on to point B to point Z, etc. It goes back and forth. But the plot is this: it's basically finding out what is behind the appearances. Okay. That is the basic idea behind the book.
Going back to the title, I found that there are several things that are referred to not just to Allan Poe, but also to Italian writers. For example, there is a very was a history. It's a part of history in Italy where Bologna and Modena had even a war, and it's called La Secchia Rapita.
La Secchia Rapita, right.
Yeah. And then it was also developed into some English writers who wrote about this. The same idea.
Okay.
There is even an opera, so it has a very literary background in a sense.
Yeah, the idea behind it, the reason why I chose the Cucchiaio, because what I wanted was something very useful, but at the same time, something that's very useful when it's transformed by the hands of an artist, it could become something even alluring, something interesting. And that's exactly what happens here, because the Cucchiaio is an Etruscan spoon that the grandfather finds. But it's not simply a spoon. On the handle, there's these incisions that inspire him to do all kinds of different things, and this is the point.
With the structure, I found it a little different from what you just said. You said it divided in two parts. I don't find that it's very distinguishable while you're reading. And also, I find that the main character, basically, if you see, it's the nonno, the grandfather. Adriano, who is the grandson, it's basically a transcriber. He follows the instructions that his grandfather tells him to do. Hester, yes, it's a character. We can find it in the beginning, but it's sort of an unusual kind of relationship between the two.
Yes.
Frankly, I would have wanted you to develop more the relationship between Adriano and
Hester.
And Hester. It could have been evolved into a love story there, but it wasn't. It was very detached from one another.
Yes.
She was strange. He was trying to find the spoon, where was the spoon that had been stolen, or at least disappeared from.
Disappeared, right.
So the characters are there, But yet, I think the Nono is instead the main character there.
Yeah, he's the one.
He had character.
Right.
He imposed himself on the
Exactly.
grandchildren to
Exactly.
write things and
Exactly.
look for the spoon.
Basically, he's the catalyst of the action.
Yeah.
Without the grandfather, Adriano would
nothing.
not
Would not
leave.
have done all that.
Would not come to the United States.
Tell me, who is the grandfather? Because there are several themes, several aspects of him which are interesting to find out. One would be maybe that he was an immigrant.
He came to the United States. Yes,
He came to the United
States. In fact, one part where he talks about at the time when he's traveling, he goes back and forth within New York City, and one night he happens to be on Sullivan Street in the Village, and he sees, in fact, a murder taking place, a killing taking place, mafia killing taking place. And there's a whole situation there where he has to make a decision: do I wait for the police or do I leave? And that's this whole thing about it.
But he was not involved. He just
No, he was not involved.
He was an observer.
But he saw it. He
Yeah.
saw it.
And then he
Okay.
decided to return
Right.
to Italy. But I would want you to talk to me a little about the fact that why did he leave Italy? Because that's
Okay.
interesting. Usually today we talk about Italy. We left Italy because of need or needs, economic needs.
He didn't leave because of needs.
Why?
He left because of fascism.
Fascism.
In other words, if you remember, there's a part there where he talks about how three of his other friends, four of them, meet in this basement and talk about
They
what's
find-
going on. And one day he decides that it's just becoming too much. He can no longer stand it. So he decides to leave, and he comes to the United States. So he leaves because of political reasons.
We don't know if he was politically involved in.
Well, he was definitely on the left. He was against the government, against the
So he
fascists,
left.
because he talks about how one time they took him down
Yeah.
to the basement, they kicked him and all that. All this really mistreated him. The point is this, that he leaves Italy because of fascism. He leaves the United States because he sees the mafia killing. So again, it's this being in two worlds, but he cannot live
He
neither
cannot
in
find
one nor in the other. And that is the point. That is the point of the book also.
Yeah,
The point of the
course.
book is that even Adriano, for example, Adriano comes here, but he sees all these things, but do we know how he's going to react? Is he going to stay here or not?
I found a veiled, I'm not sure if it is veiled because it's there, also criticism of the U.S.
Definitely.
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 Maybe you can talk to us about that.
Okay.
I think Hester begins the criticism by saying the U.S. Finally got away or chased out the imperialists, England, but then it became the
Yeah,
same
it's
thing.
it's the back cover. In fact, that's from part of one of the chapters.
yeah.
Well, Hester. With Hester, we have to mention her grandmother. Her grandmother is a very interesting character, very strong character, even before feminism. This is the 1950s. She goes to hear Billie Holiday sing in a club in the 5 Spot down in the Village. And during that night, she sings a particular song. She sings Strange Fruit. And that song, which interestingly enough, was written by a teacher from the Bronx, Jewish teacher from the Bronx. And here's a woman, a black woman, an African-American woman who sings this particular song about the South. And this whole situation, what is this, the South, the gallant South, etc., and what at the same time you have
It
this.
was already in the 20s, 30s.
Well, but the whole history of the United States has to somehow, one way or another, deal with slavery.
Yeah.
If it doesn't accept that fact and deal with it, then it's always somehow going to come back one way or another. And so that is the criticism. The criticism that even though they fought against the British imperialism, yet at the same time, when it
has
came
become
to
one of them.
people, in this case black people, they were instrument in basically enslaving them and continuing.
The other criticism, I think, is that the grandfather sort of criticized the U.S. because at that time he felt that humanism had been sort of disappeared in the progress, the automation, that he was not happy about that because he felt
No.
by doing labor work,
Right.
working on the land, for example, he says at one point to his son, a grandchild, the earth is clean, but the son knew better, said it's full of microbes.
Right,
and all
right,
that.
right. No, you're right. There is also that, in other words, because he comes here with the tradition. We always have to understand one thing, that when the grandfather comes here, he brings basically all his past with him, inevitably
Of course,
brings
we
his
all
past
do.
with him. And when he comes here and he's given, the first job he finds is in a factory. Now, this factory makes furniture factory, but he remembers the falegnameria in Italy, in other words,
which
the
is totally different.
small shop with the person who made everything from
The master
the master.
and everybody-
He did everything. He did everything. He walks into this factory and said, "What does he say? There's a a place where you're here. You just do one little thing." And to him, this was strange.
Yeah.
Another theme of the book is exactly that, this idea of coming in contact with something new, something different, and how you deal with it. How do you take it in, accept it, or reject it? What do you do with it? This is the point.
Another aspect of the grandfather is that basically he's a natural storyteller.
Yes, yes.
He tells story about people because of his name was Parma.
Yes.
Workers asked him, "How do you do Parmesan cheese?"
Right, right.
So
I'm
he
glad-
invented the whole story.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think it's I every time I look at the book and I look through it, I read that particular section simply because I think it's beautiful, because the way he does it, and he invents everything, and the way he invents and what he talks, and especially when at the very end when he talks about the three ancestors who decide to go and they want to change the way that the cheese tastes, and in order to do that they need wood that would be special.
that's
Special. Now we have to understand that this is Parma, which is near
Parma is where the Parmesan cheese comes from.
Right, but it's near
Parma
Cremona.
latte comes from.
But it's near Cremona, where they make the famous violin, Stradivarius, etc. And they come from.
With
So this
special
whole
wood.
thing about one of the ancestors has to go into the woods and cuts the tree down and has to find the right tree
Specific rate.
in order to
And here
create.
that is lost.
Yeah, but I'm glad you like that part, because
I think the more exciting, from my point of view, is that he has an imaginative mind. He has a mind that creates things. And I thought it was you that want to present about writing per se. So this grandfather goes into, he finds the spoon,
Right.
and from that his mind begins to work
Exactly,
in an extraordinary way, inventing stories and all that. And it comes a point where he enters his bathroom and he sees himself in the mirror. What happened there?
Well, that is the thing. That the whole what I was saying before about the importance of this item that's very useful, very things that we use every day, but at the same time, because of those incisions, it creates something. It creates a different world, basically, if you allow it to help you create it. And that's exactly what happens with the grandfather. The grandfather sees these incisions, specifically the eyes of this woman that he sees. That's an important thing. Again, referring
That's
back
where it
to
begins.
right. Getting back to Dante, Beatrice, and all that, which could be seen in there.
Now,
And so-
on the spoon, I
Yeah.
don't know if we said it, but the spoon, the handle of the spoon is made of wood, and
Yeah.
on there was
No. It's not wood. It's metal.
It's metal. And there are some sculptures there, and there's
Right.
a sculpture of a female face
Right.
with those eyes that are very
That the grandfather
impressive,
really is attracted
and
to.
also the lips.
The
and,
lips, right.
And so from then on, his imagination begins to explode,
To explode.
to the point where even in the bathroom, he sees. What does he see in the mirror?
Well, he sees, but that's the point. But it's not only, it doesn't explode only in him, it explodes in the whole town. Everybody who walks into the bathroom, except little children, this is also very important.
Yeah, sure it is.
For adults, all the adults who walk into the bathroom from the morning until 12 o'clock, only until 12 o'clock, and they look into the mirror, they see different things. Different, depending on the person.
And the fact that with the children, it says, usually it's the children who have an imaginatory
but I didn't want
life.
That. Exactly, I didn't want that.
And the men are very realistic. But in this sense here, it's reversed. It's reversed, the old people who begin to see. So that I felt that maybe you had the idea of presenting how a writer's mind works by through imagination. You said at one point that the mirror, in a sense, when things happen in the mirror, seeing the whole world happening, it would be like a screen, a movie screen.
Exactly.
Where you see the world going on. But I don't see that exactly in your book. I see the writer as a weaver, a person who works to create things. In other words, he's not as passive as watching the TV. And you know, the writer has to not just watch passively, but has to
exactly
right.
Exactly. No, it's not. It's not, because when they walk in, it's they participate. It's almost like it's an interactive thing. They participate depending on who walks in. For example, at one point, one of the characters that walks into it sees this soccer field, soccer stadium. And why does he see the soccer stadium? Because it's part of him. He's also, in his past, there's soccer, and he used to play soccer. So therefore, when he walks in, he sees that, and he sees all these players. Again, I mean,
the other aspect of that imagination that the old person has, he goes to the barber, and he doesn't want to look at the mirror. He says, please turn the table around, the chair around, so that he doesn't want to see the stories that he sees on the mirror. This is the
grandfather.
And what happens? The grandfather. The grandfather, then the people, crazy, they thought he was crazy or something, but they turned the chair, and then he sees the wall. And what happens? He finds a little scratch on the wall, a little... What happens there? He begins to create another world.
Let me just say something. You're mentioning points that are extremely important for the book.
Extremely important.
Extremely important for the book, and that's what makes the book. In other words, if somebody opens the book and wants a linear story from A to B, it's not there.
It's not there.
But these things that you just mentioned, extremely important. So that particular case, the grandfather at a certain point doesn't want to look in the mirror. Okay, he's avoiding it. Remember, he says his hair is grown long and everything. So he happens to walk into the barber shop, and as you said, he tells the guy to turn the chair around. Unfortunately, because he's afraid to look at the mirror, he looks in at the mirror and he sees. What does he see there? He sees basically the history of all the people who have walked into the barber shop and have, by moving the chairs, have basically left some of them.
He saw the history of the barbershop through the years.
On the wall, with all the scratches on the wall. Again, this is the writer who has to look at everything. Look at everything from one little spot, let's say, can create something.
Creative mind can, you can read whatever you like for many things.
This is what the book is about.
That is what the book is about. I'm glad that it did come out.
No, you're picked on the right spots.
With the construction of the thing, it's a. For example, you use certain strategies and certain techniques of the. Even though the grandfather tells Adriano, listen, don't pay attention to the construction, to the structure of just follow my story, tell the story. I don't want to. But Adriano is aware of it and says, you know, there are certain requirements to
because
write.
At that time he has become the narrator. He becomes the narrator. So basically, as soon as he becomes the narrator, he takes on all the history of narration, narrative, the whole history of narrative.
So your book, in a sense, it follows the advice of the grandfather in the sense that it is a novel, but when I saw it's a novel, I was looking for chapters, for example. You don't have chapters there. You simply...
Not really.
Not really. You know, they are not chapters. They are really short compositions. And I think maybe because of the short compositions, put it together, the story follows, but there are just this... It allows the writer, in a way, to become more attentive to the language, may become a little more poetic in a sense, because you
Okay.
present a short object and a short subject, and then you develop, and you have some techniques. The language, of course, I said it's probably more important than the story itself.
Well, in a way, you're right. It
I
is.
felt
Well, because let's face it,
you were
without-
weaving stories around nothing.
without the language, there is nothing. There is no story without the language.
Yeah.
So it's the language really that the way you use in the language that creates the tone, creates the narrative, creates everything, creates the characters.
Yeah, it
That's it.
everything. So that's why
Yeah.
I think that
Yeah.
maybe it would mean better or more to say you weave things out, and so I think it comes.
I like the metaphor of the weaving. That's exactly.
Talking about metaphors, you have beautiful metaphors over there. I think I have some that the image of the pick, the piccone, pick.
Yeah.
That was sensual in a sense. They say the grandfather loved to raise the pick and hit the ground, soft ground that received the hard
Right.
metal. It's
So
almost
before that, but the idea, he says that he does that because it's the beginning of growth, the beginning of creation, basically. You have to do
But
that.
the question
with
is,
the earth.
because the piccone hitting the soft ground, receiving
Yeah.
the earth almost felt like a woman in a sense,
Whoa.
ready to receive the pick, so that the sames could be received, the seed,
The seed,
could
right.
be
Right.
received. Yeah.
No, I mean that I accept your interpretation. It's good. I like it.
How about
I like it.
about death? La morte come la puttana
That's why.
goes to bed with everybody.
Exactly. That's that's the grandfather again. Remember, every time he goes to sleep at night, he sees on the wall, in this darkness, he projects on the wall his whole history. And he says, in other words, I'll wait for her to come, but I will not allow her to stop me from creating what I need to create every night, which is, again, this whole idea of the human being asserting himself against the imminent death,
The
darkness.
other that I thought it was really beautiful, where it's il vento che andava e che era andato via con il sole. It's like two lovers, the wind that went away with the sun, like two lovers just walking away, in a theatrical way. That
right,
was
okay.
also.
Okay.
So, but what is the spoon represented through the grandfather?
The spoon. Well, the spoon again. Let's look at it from the very beginning. When he finds it, he's there to do what? To uproot the roots of the tree. The tree has been cut, and the only thing that's left is a trunk and the roots. So he's there to do that. Metaphorically, he's there basically. It's the experience of the immigrant. You uproot.
Yeah.
Whenever you leave, you leave
transport.
something behind, and you that's it. You start a different life. Now, what's interesting here, I didn't want the typical metaphor of the uprooted, etc. About the immigrant. What I wanted to do, yes, the tree has been cut. He has to take away the roots from the earth, but at the same time, wanted him to find something else, because as he takes the roots away, he finds a spoon. And the spoon is a new creation.
I find that to be the pivotal part of the history, where now his imagination is where he starts working and becomes creative.
Exactly.
We don't have much more time. We're really busy. I have to go. I wish we could have another hour. Colors. You use colors, tremendous colors, vivid colors. Is that something that has to do with you presently, or you feel the colors very part of the...
Well, let me put it this way. When I'm trying to write, the most important thing is to create concrete things. Whether it's the spoon or whatever it is, the panorama, the landscape, everything. It has to be real. It has to be something that I feel very close to, and that's why all the colors are there. But it's not only color; it's everything. For example, when Hester sits next to Adriano on the bus, the very beginning of the novel, okay. And she turns towards him to tell him that she was born in one of those places, in one of those houses. And and he feels her lips basically on his face. That is a very sensual image. But
no, but I saw that you use colors frequently. Also, one technique that you use that technique to what do you say? No, remember the bus, in the bus, the same situation. The bus driver starts talking. It uses that paratactic system, or paratactic.
Some people might say that that's a stream of consciousness, but it's not really stream of consciousness, because what it is, it's the way he speaks,
It's the way
he is. It's almost, he starts talking and there's no punctuation. It's like
it was 3 or 4 pages without punctuation.
This river flowing. He talks about what does he talk about? He talks about New York City. Okay, and there's all kinds of references there too about different books that have been written about New York City.
Okay, I think we have basically reached the end of our conversation.
Wow.
Time has passed.
It was quick. It was very quick.
Yeah. So, thank you very much.
I appreciate your inviting me. Thank you very much.
And please come next time when we will be presenting another Italian American writers. Thank you.